Hey y'all, how's everybody doing? Real quick before we get started, this video is an interview. Then after the interview, I've got 3 stories. So it's kind of a mixed interview, narrated stories. But real quick, if you would like to be interviewed and tell your story in your own voice, I'm happy to do that. Matter of fact, I love doing these interviews. So if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email, dixiecryptid@gmail.com. It's in the description below. You can copy it and paste it in your address bar. Send me an email and in the subject put interview so I can see it. It kind of stands out to me. And then write 2 or 3, 4 sentences, nothing long. You don't have to write out the whole story, but just give me an idea of what we're going to talk about and your phone number. And I'll give you a call and we'll line up an interview. Doesn't matter if the interview's 15 minutes long, 10 minutes long, or an hour long. Most of them have been an hour so far, but it doesn't matter. Heck, I can cram 3 or 4 interviews in a video. But if you'd like to do that, I'm looking for more of those. I've got several lined up. I've got several already done that we're going to release over the next couple of weeks. Yeah, I'm not going to waste any more time. We're going to roll with this video. All right, here we go. Hey everybody, welcome to another interview. I'm so glad to have this guest on. I've actually been trying to connect with her for about 2 months, maybe longer. I'd have to look back at my email dates, but I've been so busy that I haven't had these interviews take a little time to do and to edit, and I just didn't feel like I had enough time to do these justice. But I'm back in the saddle again. And we have Janet from Washington State who is on the line, and she has some she's actually from the East Coast. I'm going to let her explain all that in a minute, but she's got some encounter stories from her family members, and she sent me an email describing, just hitting the high points of it. But it was so good, I wanted to ask her to come on if she was willing to tell this in her own words. So, Janet, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Great. Now, you're out in Washington State. We were talking about the weather. Tell everybody what the weather's like in August out there in the hills of western Washington State.
Well, out here right now, this time of year, July and August, and sometimes September, we have our real pretty, what we call summer weather. It used to be back when I was growing up that you only got about 2 weeks of that. Right. So now it's kind of extended itself over time, and we hit about 75, 80 degrees most of the time. I mean, if we get into the 90s or above, we're all sweltering.
Oh yeah. So I knew what she was going to say, but I wanted all the people down south that are dealing with the mosquitoes and the 100% humidity and the 95, 98 degree weather to be jealous of her. She's got it made out there.
We don't have to deal with that.
That's right. She's got it made out there. Janet, do you mind taking a minute? I know in your email you were describing to me how your people are from the East Coast. Do you want to talk about that at all, or kind of give some background on where you can go?
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm real proud of my people and how I was raised and how we came to be here in Washington State. Yeah, both of my grandparents came from the Western Hills of North Carolina. My paternal grandfather and family, they came here when my daddy was about 16 years old, and they came, from a little town, it's called Canton area, North Carolina. So the reason that the family moved out here was because at the time, there wasn't much money to be made in the area back there. And out here, you could come and cut timber and whatnot and make, $100 a day. So in the 60s, that was a good income. My grandfather was a minister. He had been contacted by a church out here, so they decided to come on out. And they settled out here. And around the same time, my mama's family, her father was already worked in the woods, so they came out too, but they didn't know one another. And then they met and fell in love and, raised us. And we're raised in kind of a rural area compared to where I live now. Of course, most city folks would think that I was crazy saying that I lived in the city. But how I grew up, For example, if you heard a car, somebody was at your house.
Yeah.
So, there were no neighbors within spitting distance. I mean, you'd have to walk a quarter mile, half a mile to get to the neighbor's house. And it was nothing for us to wake up with elk or deer or, even on occasion a bear running through our property.
I was just going to ask you, your grandfather moved you all out there for trying to make a better life. Do you have any people that you're still in touch with still on the East Coast?
Oh, Lord, yeah, we've got all kinds of family back there. In fact, our biggest joke here is that we're all second growth Tar Heels because we weren't born in Tar Heel.
Okay.
But we're a second generation of those that were. And so we've got all kinds of family back there in North Carolina, Tennessee area.
Now, this encounter you're about to talk about, it happened out in North Carolina, right?
Actually, no, this one happened here in Western Washington.
Okay. All right.
It was in an area my dad my dad became a timber cutter too in his youth. And then he built houses. And then later on, he got into the automotive industry. But for years, he cut timber all over the Western Hills of Washington. And my grandfathers did too. So it was natural for him to, educate us and being in the hills. And quite truthfully, a lot of times if we hadn't hunted for our food and things like that, we'd have done without mostly because we raised a huge garden and Daddy hunted and took us from the time we were little. We did a lot of fishing and things like that. So we got really used to that and come to that's the way of life that we just love.
Right. And so you guys, they move out there. Now, this encounter has to do with your brother?
Yes, he was, because of the love of the hills, he grew up hunting. Now, things have changed a lot I just turned 51 years old. And so in my lifetime, things have changed a lot out here with a lot of the regulations and things of where you can go and what you can do. But when my dad was hunting a lot, he used to have 13 hounds that he hunted. And my brother grew up and I grew up doing that. So my brother, when he got of age, he decided he wanted a few hounds and he could still go to several places and hunt. Him and his good buddy went up, were hunting around, and they've hunted a lot of these hills quite often. So they know the areas. They know what to expect in those areas and that kind of thing. And that's why this was such a unique situation.
And what were they hunting with dogs?
They had a special permit on this occasion to go in, and they were hunting, they were going to hunt a cat that was causing some issues that was coming down out of the hills, and they were going to try to hunt it, just driving the road. What they do, folks that know how about hunting and dog hunting and whatnot will already know this, but those that don't, what they do is they'll put a dog up on top of the dog box in the back of the truck when they get up to an area that they think that they might find the game. And that dog's usually a lead dog. And it'll start stints in the air. And they'll do, when they get out at a certain bark, they call it striking off the box. In other words, there's a hot trail, that dog is going to go ballistic. And so the particular dog that they put on the box that evening was, her name was June. And June was a real smart dog, and she was very well trained. And she was a dog that was very experienced. They had hunted her quite a bit, and they had about 5 or 6 dogs with them. And because June was so experienced, they decided that she would be the lead that night. And when she struck, they were kind of in an area that they really didn't care for or something. It was just a little bit of a difficult area to get to. They were on an old logging road that had been used at one time for pulling out the logs that they had cut. And it hadn't been used quite a bit, so it was a little bit rugged. And off of the left-hand side of the road, you would have to go down a ravine about, I would say 500-600 yards straight down. And then you get into a area that bottomed out and flattened out. And if you went about, I'd say 2 miles, there would be a real nice creek that ran along the other side of the ravine that once you crossed that creek, you'd head straight up another 300-400 yards before you could get back up into another old logging grade. Okay. And the problem with this one was out here, unlike our east side or some of the other places of hunting, there's a lot of underbrush. And we have some pretty nasty different kind of foliage and things, and one of them is called a devil's club. And this area was rife with those. And a devil's club, for those that don't know what it is it's a kind of a bush that grows, and it's got these spines on it. And if you ain't careful and you get too close to them, they come off in you. And I swear to God, their biggest purpose is to go as deep into you as they can get. And they hurt like the dickens. So they weren't too excited about going off in here, but June was throwing a fit about it, so they decided to let the dogs out and run. And about the time that they were doing this, it was starting to get dark. They let the dogs out, and the dogs took off. Well, then my brother and his buddy, they head down at this ravine, and they can hear the dogs, and they can hear that they're heading towards the creek. And this time of year, it had rained quite a bit, and so that creek, the closer you get to it, the more of a roar it makes. You get too close, and you can't hear much anything but that roar of that creek. So they were trying to keep up with the dogs, and you could tell by the way a dog runs what it's running. And sometimes, if it's running a bobcat or a cougar, like what they'd hoped, it'll run kind of in circles sometimes. It'll run for a ways, but usually it won't run too far before it'll tree. And this particular instance, the dogs just seemed to keep going up this creek or through the flat towards the creek. And so my brother and his buddy, they were doing their best to keep up, and they took a moment to pause, catch their breath. They listened, and they could hear that all of a sudden the dogs seemed to turn around and head back towards them in the way that they were baying. And they were both scratching their heads because, a bear also, if you're running a bear and they get on that, usually a bear will find a place after it runs for a little while, like a tree or something to back up to.
Right.
Or a cliff, and it'll fight. But this seemed to be going on extra long, and they were a little puzzled at what the dogs were actually hit on. And so all of a sudden, they decide, okay, well, we better hurry up, and see what's going on, because it sounds like those dogs are running whatever it is right back at us. Well, the other thing you ought to know when you're running bear, if you happen to encounter one, don't turn your flashlight on, because if a bear's nearby and they're running, that bear will run at that light. They made sure that they didn't turn their flashlights on because they didn't want it right in their face. I mean, my brothers actually had to kill one time when it run close as up to him, but in 6-8 feet.
Wow.
They were heading out towards this. Just about that time, the most god-awful roar that you've ever heard in your life. My brother said it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It stopped them both and dead in their tracks. And all of a sudden, the dogs went totally silent. And they looked at each other, my brother and his buddy, and they were like, what in the world was that? And my brother said it was so loud that it overrode the creek, every sound, everything around them, and he could feel the percussion of it in his chest. When they kind of registered what had happened, they were looking at one another and what was that, And about that time, then they heard this crashing. And before they could get too alarmed, here were the dogs. And these dogs were at their feet kind of cowering, and they had peed on themselves, and they were just acting totally out of character. No amount of trying to hiss them back on a trail or figure out what was going on was helping. These dogs were, very upset, including June. Now, June had been, to give you a little bit background on her, she had been bear bit before. So she had actually cornered a bear with a pack of dogs, and dogs will run in at the bear and try to fight it. And if a bear gets pretty agitated and whatnot, a lot of times it'll stand up and it'll swipe with its front legs. Sometimes it'll catch a dog, and when it does, it'll grab it and it'll pull it into it and it'll bite it. And they call that getting bear bit.
Right.
And then as the other dogs are running in to fight, when it's occupied with the dog it's got in its claws, then it'll sometimes throw the dog. Oftentimes, a dog that gets bear bit, it won't ever hunt again. It'll be too afraid. But June, she had been bear bit, and she wasn't afraid of nothing. She would just keep fighting. So to see her cowering and acting like she had been beaten, was just so unusual. And because of that sound and everything, my brother and his buddy decided they'd call it a night and head the dogs back to the truck. And the dogs were more than willing to be put back on leash and go. So they made their way as fast as they could back up to the truck. And just as they got there, a couple buddies of theirs were also pulling up. I reckon they were going to hunt that area as well. And it had started to rain, and it was, getting pretty dark, because it gets dark earlier in the woods than it does, out in city or whatever,
Right. Sure.
Yeah, and especially with the underbrush there, it's not like you're walking through where you can see at a great distance. You're fighting all the underbrush,
Right.
and so it really seems a lot darker. Well, they got up to the truck, and those buddies were there, and it had started raining pretty good, and one of the buddies rolled down the window about a quarter of an inch, just barely stick his nose out, I guess. And he looked at my brother and he said, "What in the heck made that sound?" And my brother was like, and they were white as sheets, And my brother like, "Good Lord, I don't know." He said, "But whatever it was." And his other buddy said, "Well, I reckon that was a Bigfoot, And they all kind of agreed, even though my brother, he didn't really believe in them very much because, he had never seen one or had any encounter. But he told me later, he said, "Well," he said, "I might have to change my thinking on that."
Oh, wow. Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it was, to have that happen with the dogs that are so love to hunt and aren't afraid of anything, you kind of have to take notice,
Oh, yeah. Did that pretty much end the night for them, or did the...
Yeah, they pretty much called it a night that night. They were like, "Well, I think we're going to hunt this cat later."
Wow.
Because whatever it wasn't a cat. They were sure of that.
You're right about these dogs. These hunting dogs, they're not afraid of anything. Anything that moves in the woods, they're trained to get after it. And I think, I don't know much about hunting dogs, but every one of them I've ever been around, they'll be sweet as they can be to humans. But like, for instance, a dog that'll run raccoons, they want to kill those raccoons. They're not trained necessarily they're trained to tree them and track them and tree them and then keep them at bay in a tree so the hunters can get there and shoot them out or catch them or whatever they do. Those dogs they're on their way. They want to kill whatever they're chasing. Primal instinct in dogs. And so and I know nothing about these dogs that are trained to track big predators, but I know this, they will tangle up with a big cat. I know they will. They'll try to, and they're smart. They stay far enough away. All that to say is when they come back and they're peeing all over themselves and their tails are tucked between their legs. I've even got one story early on, and this was a story that someone actually told me here. His dogs quit barking after a big roar from way up in the trees, and he got to them, and they were laying flat on the ground with their bellies flat on the ground. They wouldn't move. He had to pick them up and carry them out. They were so afraid they wouldn't move. You're right. That something, it wasn't a cat that they got on. That's not the track they got on. No, it wasn't a bear,
because they were very familiar with that. And, one of the things that I know about my brother and his buddy, and then my dad too, they train their dogs to hunt a variety of game. And you could usually tell, like I said earlier, you could usually tell by the way that they ran and the way that they bayed what they were running. These dogs were not afraid of a bear or a cat or anything. And to have them being so upset and just shaking all over and, like you said, have impeded themselves, I think they would have been amiss in not taking note of that.
Is this your brother's only encounter, or has he had others?
It was his only encounter. My dad used to tell a story, and he too, all growing up, we always heard, "Now, I don't believe in Bigfoot. I don't believe in that and this." But he told us a story about his hunting one night, and it was a kind of just a short thing, if I can share it with you real quick.
Of course.
He and a bunch of his friends went hunting, and they had finished for the night. They were hunting raccoon that night. They stopped, and a bunch of them smoked, so they stopped to smoke. And we're kind of standing around smoking, and all of a sudden, the dogs kind of started kind of whimpering kind of sound, and which was unusual. And they started looking around, and one of them shined their flashlight down the railroad grade that they were on. And all of a sudden, they said they seen this set of eyes. And the eyes weren't on the side of the head like most animals. They were in the front. And at first, they thought it was a person. And they started hollering, "Hey, what's happening?" And things like that, asking, who are you? But because of the way the dogs were acting, they were a little curious. Well, when they would shine the flashlight down there, this thing, once they flashed its eyes, it would turn its head away from the light. They were trying to hiss the dogs on it when they figured out it wasn't a person, didn't seem to be a person. It wasn't answering. And the dogs would not. And so one of the guys said, well, I'm going to shoot it. And, and the others, no, don't do that. We don't know what it is, you know?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden they were shining. They all started shining their lights down there. And this thing stood up. Now, when they were shining before, it was only about the height of an average man, maybe about 5'10", maybe 6 foot. But when this thing stood up, my dad said he'll never forget. It was probably over 8 feet tall, and it never roared at him or did anything. But he said, "Now I'll tell you all right now." He said, "I don't know what that was, because all of a sudden it took a few steps and it was gone, like it had never been there." And he said, "But I'll tell you right now, that was a Bigfoot." He said, "I don't believe in it, but that's a Bigfoot."
Yeah.
And I've heard noises and things, my own personal things. I've heard noises when we've been out camping and different things that, a cat will scream, and some people will swear it's a woman. It sounds just like a woman screaming. I've heard a couple of screams before that they weren't no cat.
And you were telling me before we started, you've had some small anecdotal things happen there close to you. Do you have time to talk about that, or?
Sure. Where I live we're about 15 minutes from a city. I would say what do you say the population would be, honey? About 90,000 people. We have, where we're at, there's green belts between each of the sections of housing. So there's at least 30, 40 feet. Well, like I was telling you, when we first started talking, I was just sitting out watching the deer out here in our yard. So we have a lot of food for any predators that like to come around. We've had a bear in the backyard. We've had a cougar even 4 days ago. People were all up in arms because everybody out here loves their dogs. There was a cougar just, I'd say, a football field away, prowling around, looking for some easy target. The deer are so acclimated to all of us that they don't spook easily. Right. So I reckon the cats think, that's an easy target, But we've been sitting here at nights, and, we get a lot of coyotes come in and different things. So I know what those sounds are. But we've heard some sounds that my husband and I, that we can't put our finger on what it is, And I've even got on the internet, because you can find just about anything on there these days. And I've listened to the elk calls and the deer and all the different wildlife, and none of it has been the same. But some of the recordings that y'all have talked about in different programs, it's real similar. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me, that they're very close by, because there's enough passageways that they could get into the hills real easily.
Washington State,
Yes.
I mean, based on the evidence and the, encounter reports and all, I would say your state's covered up with them, but some people might disagree. But when anybody thinks about Bigfoot, that's what they think of the Pacific Northwest. So
that's right.
And I think that's probably because that's where the Patterson-Gimlin film, that's where they filmed that animal. So,
absolutely.
Do you have an opinion on what you think these things are? Do you have you developed, I know you haven't had a face-to-face encounter, and it's hard to.
No, I haven't. But, and then sometimes I think I really want to, and then there's other times, I think maybe not.
Yeah.
I do think that they're probably a hominid of type. I don't know if they have, they've got to be pretty intelligent to avoid humans as much as possible. I don't think sometimes we give the animal kingdom as much credit as we should for their intelligence. These seem to be, very, very intelligent. It just fascinates me. I'd like to know more about them, to know they are, but I'm not, I'm very much, even though I grew up hunting and different things like that, we only killed for a purpose. We didn't kill for sport.
Right.
So for me, I'm not an advocate of killing one to find out more about it. I'd rather, find out from just taping or evidence and things like that.
Yeah.
But, I really do believe they exist, and some people would laugh at us for that, but that's all right.
Well, I do this channel, and I've never had any kind of encounter at all. I've never actually ever seen any evidence of a Bigfoot. Maybe some things that would be questionable, but there are so many different stories about these things, and even the physical evidence that people show, and we never know if it's authentic or not. There's one film that I believe is authentic, and that's the Patterson-Gimlin film. I don't think, and that's my opinion, I don't have anything to base that on other than personally, I believe that looks very authentic. Even looking at you have a variety of encounter stories and how they behave, what they do. Some are aggressive, some are very passive, some are actually nice. Had one story where a young Bigfoot was playing with a woman's dog. She had lost her dog, and she looked over, and there's a Bigfoot like playing fetch with her dog. And even the visual and even the audio evidence, it varies so much that it's hard to say that, all cougars are basically the same. Mountain lions,
Right.
all bears are basically the same with varying degrees of behavior, and general behavior is the same. That's not the way it is with
Their
Bigfoot.
nature is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think there's a lot of speculation with people. I know that the human mind can conjure a lot of things and be very, hear things, scare ourselves to death, so to speak. But some things, they just can't be explained. And, that's why I was telling you how we were raised and what my family did and whatnot, and how much time we spent in these hills, that to have something so odd happen.
Yeah.
And something you can't put your finger on, it just makes you wonder.
I understand your husband has had some kind of encounter, and you said he might be willing to get on and tell us about that. Is that something he's willing to do?
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to hand the phone over to him here. His name is Drew.
Hi there.
Hi, Drew. Cam Buckner here. How are you?
Cam, how you doing?
Man, you've got a peach of a bride there. She knows what she's talking about.
She does. She actually, I think, was a little nervous and would actually tell the story a little more thoroughly if she wasn't so nervous.
She did great. I can't wait for you to hear what she did. But she was telling me you've had an event in your life with these things. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. I was 11, and I used to live in the same town we're about 15 minutes outside of, and so it was kind of a more rural with farms around. The houses were probably about, you weren't right next to each other. You had a lot of fields in the next house. I used to go out and go in the county just to go exploring as a little kid, but my grandmother lived in the house. It was a two-story house on the edge of a small stream, and it kind of went down to the stream, and I spent a lot of hours as a child playing in that stream and really liked it. But when you got down to the stream, to go onto the other side, you'd have to go up about a 3-foot bank. And you couldn't see on the other side of the stream because you had a bunch of pine and cedar trees, and they're very large, and you had to get up in them, and then you could see them there just fine because there's no underbrush once you got into the trees. So when I was 11, I was visiting my grandmother, and I was down at this creek playing around like I had for many years, and I had one of these. She had a weed eater thing where it was like a long, almost like a spear. At the end, it had kind of a fork where you stick it into the weed and pull the weed up. And I was pretending like I was down the stream and I was going to spear a fish, like I'd seen on TV. And all of a sudden, I had heard on the other side of the bank. First of all, I felt like I was being watched, and I felt like there was something up there watching me. And then I heard footsteps, and it sounded very methodical, kind of like you're like a bipedal footstep kind of thing. And I thought the only thing we had large that we ever encountered, there was once in a while the cows in the far upper field would come down to the stream and drink, but that was very, very rare. And so it kind of got spooked. When I felt like I was being watched and I heard footsteps, it kind of spooked me. So I went up to my uncle and was at the house, and I told him and the neighbor kid that was 4 years older than me. And so we all went back down. I said, something's up in the woods. I'm sure what it is. And so we went down and investigated. So we went across a small stream. We went up into the woods where we could see. And we're standing there, and we could hear something walking around. And it was very close. I'd say about 40 yards away. It wasn't right next to us, but it was fairly close. But the weird thing is there's no underbrush to cover what we were hearing, so we couldn't see it, but we could hear it, and it was really odd. And I remember even squatting down and trying to look like, you put your head to the side like you're trying to look underneath something, even though there was nothing to look under. It was just like, how are we not seeing what's walking around here? And you could hear it was a very large something walking around. And then the tree we were standing by, up in the top of the tree, something started making a ruckus. And we're like looking up in the tree, what in the hell can that be? And we can't, because the trees were probably 100, 150 feet tall, so you couldn't see the top being at the base. But there was something up there making a ruckus. And we're like, what is that? And the only thing I could think at the time is it has to be a large bird, like an eagle or something, because of the ruckus it was making. That kind of spooked us all, because and then also we heard the walking. The walking started coming closer to us. But at the same time, we can't see anything. And and all of a sudden my uncle, who was an adult, he's getting scared, and which scared me and scared the neighbor kid. And we go, we need to get out of here. And so we did. We got out of there. I have no idea what it was, but I've heard some of the encounters people have had where they haven't seen anything, but had kind of a similar thing. So I don't know what it was, but it was a very odd experience. Only speculation I have is that some people have said that they've had encounters before they can't see them, they disappear or something. I don't know. I really don't know. And that I thought maybe there was a small one up in the tree. Just total speculation. I have no idea.
Sure.
It was a very weird encounter, and it was something I never experienced before or after. Well, I take that back. I have experienced it after. I've heard footsteps that we live next to a mountain called King Mountain. Being up on that mountain, I had heard same thing. I heard footsteps when I was on there's a trail that would lead up the mountain, and I went to the top, and there's now a cell tower, and so you can drive up there now. And I walked down this old trail, just out of nostalgia from when I used to do it as a kid. And the same thing. I walked probably about 100 feet down that trail, and all of a sudden I started hearing footsteps. I'm like, no, that can't. That's not right. But the brush was higher then, so it could have been a deer. It could have been some other kind of animal at that point. But I was just like, no, I'm out of here.
It's like a deja vu experience, wasn't
it? It was totally. It was like, I didn't know what happened as a child, but here's I was kind of as an adult, experienced that like 20 years later. And I'm thinking, what are the odds that I'd be walking down this trail and all of a sudden I'd hear something walking through the woods and can't see it?
When you were young and this occurred, was there any other buzz around the area with your neighbors of talk of anything strange, or was it just isolated to you and that was kind of the extent of it?
Yeah, that was the extent of it. There wasn't any other kind of buzz. I would say, this is back in the mid 70s. And so really the whole thing of Bigfoot was just starting to come alive. No, I not that I remember. It was a kind of thing where I remember being very curious about that. I remember that's when you started seeing things on TV, started seeing the shows, and like In Search Of. Do you remember In Search Of?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and we never thought about that stuff. We live in the southern part. Well, your wife is familiar with, the woodlands over here, and I would have never, if somebody would have told me when I was young, like you were then, that there were Bigfoot around, we would have laughed at you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matter of fact, it was like, you're crazy, but now it's it's really common that people, not in the scope of the total population of, a specific area, but you get reports out of areas that you never think you would have before, because you guys live in an area where you would expect to get reports from these things, but not around here. So right. I understand walking through the woods and something's walking there and it's like, there's no doubt in your mind there's something there because you can hear it and you're not deaf. Yeah. You're not imagining these things. So, that's fascinating.
See, the thing that was really odd about it is how close it was. It must have been at one point 30 yards away from us with nothing in between us besides trees that were, very large trees, but those were kind of spread out. So if there was, whatever it was, there's no way it could have concealed itself. But yet our ears are telling us something's there, but our eyes are saying nothing's there.
And you had a sense about you that you felt like you were being watched.
Yes. At the start, when I was down the plain, I definitely felt like I was being watched. And that's when I started hearing the footsteps, which caused me to go get my uncle and the neighbor kid to go investigate.
These anecdotal stories, to me, are just as important because it's the same as a visual sighting. There's no doubt something was there. And it may add a little credence to the cloaking theory that people have. I don't know. I was just telling Janet that there are so many different behaviors reported, different visuals. There's such a vast difference in the way they behave and what they look like that it's hard to pin down what you're actually even looking at, or hearing.
Absolutely. I think it is. I think our paradigm that we think of the world, it all of a sudden introduces something that we're like, well, it doesn't register. I wanted to add with her family is they were very much non-believers. And I always loved the story about her father on the railroad grade, because he always said, he goes, now, I don't believe in Bigfoot because it didn't fit into his paradigm. It just didn't fit in. But that was a Bigfoot. What do you say? I don't believe in it, but that was a Bigfoot, which used to always make me laugh,
Yeah.
And her brother, before the start of the thing, he almost got in a fight with the guy that said, when they got on this subject, because he's never experienced anything like this in all the years. And he loves hunting. He spent a lot of hours up in the woods. He's never seen anything. And so he almost got in a fight with the guy. I told him he saw it. And he goes, I don't believe that. And he goes, you're saying I'm a liar? He goes, yeah, basically. But after his experience, he's reevaluating. Well, maybe that guy wasn't so crazy.
Yeah, there's I was, again, telling Janet, there's a video I did early on, a couple of years ago, about I think it's called Bigfoot Killed My Best Dog. But the guy that told me the story is such a sober, and he doesn't talk much. And I'm recalling this because her brother kind of, in a way, reminds me of, I could just almost see her brother in front of me telling me the story she just told. But he's a sober guy. He doesn't talk much. If he says something, people actually listen. Those type of people. Yep. And they're not a loud mouth like me. I mean, I run my mouth all the time. But and he sat there and told me that story, and my son knows him. And I remember asking my son, I said, what do you think about that? He goes, look, he hardly ever talks at all. And if he talks, it's always about something, serious, about work. They actually work together.
Right.
He said, whenever I hear him tell that story, I believe it. And of course, my son is like Janet's father. He doesn't believe in Bigfoot. This guy didn't believe in Bigfoot, but my son will say, I think that was a Bigfoot. And it's so funny that they don't believe, but they're like, it's so interesting. Well, listen, thank you for doing that. I know it was kind of spur of the moment, and it was great to hear your voice and hear the story in your voice. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We appreciate it too.
Yeah. Do you mind if I say?
Yeah. My wife says she's sorry that she's nervous.
Does she want to get back on?
Hey there.
Hey, do you have anything else you want to share with us, Mr. Nervous?
Yeah, I apologize for that. I get nervous talking on the phone like that, but knowing that you're being recorded or whatever.
Oh, you did perfect. Don't you worry about a thing. You did great.
Thank you. But I did want to extend to you and tell you, and I sent you that message, but I wanted to say it in person too. If you ever come out to Washington State, look us up, because we'd be happy to take you up in the hills and take you fishing or whatever.
Oh, thank you so much. That is so nice of you.
Extend that.
Yeah.
I know that sounds, a lot of people play lip service to that, but I can give you witnesses that know that people we've never met before. We told them, come on out. And they did. And then we showed them a good time. Oh. Like I told you in the message, we'll treat you so many different ways. You're bound to like one of them.
Well, thank you very much. And, a lot of people have invited me to do things. And I actually believe every one of them is serious, maybe a dozen or two people. And I actually had a guy this morning call me, and he wants me to come out with them. And my problem is I kind of do this as a hobby, as a sideline, and I'm so busy all the time and I even told you the reason I couldn't connect with you is because I'm actually out of work, but I'm so busy doing things for other people. It's hard to find time to do anything, much less this channel. So, but you're very nice. I hear you. You're very nice to invite me out there. And listen, I want to tell you, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And I know everyone will enjoy your story. And do you have any parting?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you have any parting words?
No, just God bless and take good care. And thanks for, taking care of the show. It's very enjoyable to listen to. I love hearing other people's encounters, and hopefully someday we'll know 100% for sure, one way or the other.
Oh, I hope so. And that's, and I'm glad you enjoy the videos. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Great. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for listening to Janet and Drew. I want to thank Janet and Drew for agreeing to come on. It's just a pleasure talking to them. And we'll go ahead and wind this up, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Thank you. Before we move on to these stories, I got a little business to take care of here. I want to say happy birthday to 3 people. First, I want to say happy birthday to Shelly Ann. Her birthday is August the 2nd. I hope you had a great birthday, Shelly Ann. Your husband, Craig, sent me an email, told me it was your birthday, and I just want to say happy birthday to you. I hope you had a great day. He told me he's a jockey. He's a horse rider. He races horses. That's awesome. I've never met a jockey. I used to spend a lot of time at Keeneland up in Lexington. We take off Friday afternoons around lunch and head over to the track, me and a bunch of buddies, and we'd watch the horses race. And the beer always tastes better at the horse track. That's the best place to drink beer. Doesn't matter what kind of beer it is. It's always good at the horse track. Second, I'd like to say happy birthday to Don down in Alabama. His birthday is August the 8th. He's going to be 57 years old. Don, your wife sent me this email. She told me to tell you happy birthday. You better give her a big hug, buddy. Hope you had a good one. Oh, I hope you have a good one on August the 8th. And last, I want to say happy birthday to Gracie Zella. Gracie, I think it's your mom who sent that email to me. She said you're going to be 5 years old on September the 2nd. And did you know September the 2nd is my mother's birthday? Same birthday as my mother. How about that? Hope you guys can start school this year, because if you do, you're going to have a huge amount of fun, make some new friends. I hope you're looking forward to it. And if not, just hang in there. School's going to come back. It'll be back, and everything's going to be squared away in no time. That's what I think. Happy birthday, Gracie Zella. You've got a really sweet mom. These are Tommy's encounters that weren't included in the original video, the Skinwalker, Colorado video. These are some she had sent me afterwards, and I actually narrated these in a live stream right after that video posted. But for those of you who don't watch live streams, I wanted to have a good record of this, and if you've already heard it, just click away. But if you haven't, I think you're going to find these fascinating. Here's what she writes. During November of 1985, right before my father died, we moved back to the family property and had been there a month. The creatures that haunted me as a little girl were not on my mind. I had been busy setting up our home and getting the children settled. I wasn't thinking about monsters. My experience with these things up until 1985, though, was that whenever we built a new structure or anything major changed on the property, the creatures would become mischievous. It never failed. My husband was at work and the kids and I were visiting a friend. We made it home around 9 p.m. and I told the kids to get ready for bed. We watched TV for an hour and they headed off to bed. I could finally relax on the couch. But my alone time did not last long. My oldest son ran out of his bedroom yelling that someone was trying to come through his bedroom window. I grabbed my .357 pistol and the flashlight and I headed out the door. I walked around the house and everything was clear, but it was eerily quiet. My father lived on the same property and I called him. He thought it was doubtful that anyone would try to break in out there anyway. Our place was off the road, and if anyone was here, I would have heard or seen them. My husband would be home soon, so I waited on him. After explaining what had happened, he went out to look out the bedroom window. He found the screen had been pried away and bent backwards. He bent it back into shape and reinstalled it. Later, my father asked my brother if he had played a prank on us, and then he warned my brother that I would shoot his ass if he did it again. But that's not what had happened. Another incident in August of 2017. We were hauling hay in the late evening. My oldest son was helping out. He owned a bobcat with forks and he helped us stack the 1-ton hay bales in the barn. We had been in the barn about 15 minutes and my grandkids came rolling into the yard in their 4-wheel drive truck. We watched them pull into the pasture instead of coming to the barn. The LED light bar on the truck illuminated the field as they drove across. They made it to the edge of the field and then looked back and got out. I could see them running across the field towards us, and they were yelling at us as they ran. They had seen a Sasquatch crossing the pasture when their light hit the field. The pasture is wide and long. One loop around the fence is a half mile. We hopped on our ATVs and we headed over to them. The boys were frantic with excitement and a bit scared too. We finally got something out of them, and here's what they described. When the light hit the field, they saw a massive 8-foot-tall, black hair-covered creature walking at a quick pace, arms swinging by its side. When it realized it had been seen, it was gone in an instant. Both boys were amazed at how fast this creature moved for its size. We looked for tracks and we found none. These things don't always leave tracks. The investigator who helped me in the past once told me that he found a single track in the middle of the snow-covered field. The snow had been fresh and the track was perfect, and there were no other tracks leading to or from the one he found. I have the same experience on my place. I'll find 1 or 2 tracks when there should be a series of tracks to follow, but they end just like the creature had vanished. Late in the summer of 2015, I had an encounter with a creature that I think was a dog man. My husband and I were getting ready to go to bed, and we always let our chihuahuas out to do their business before we turn in for the evening. I take my spotlight with me because of my history with the creatures on this place. I was scanning the pasture for eye shine. My husband told me to turn off the damn light so I wouldn't upset the neighbors. I never spotlight the neighbors' houses, but he gets a little cranky over my light. I shined the light past my son's home onto my neighbor's driveway. There was a creature walking on 2 legs, hunched over with something hanging out of its mouth. Whatever was in its mouth was either dead or dying because I could see the reflection of its eyes. This creature's big red eyes captured me. They drew me in, and I was staring at something that did not make sense to me. It lumbered along slowly and steadily. It never paid attention to me until I called to my husband and said, "Do you see this thing? What the hell is it?" We both watched it move along the fence, and then the creature stopped and it looked right at us. It was hard to see because its hair blended with the prairie colors. When it turned to look at us, its head was wide and its eyes were set on the side of its face like a horse, except the eyes seemed to be flat against its face. To give you an idea of how big its eyes were, there is a light pole that sits on my neighbor's driveway. This light pole has a reflector on it, and the creature's eyes were bigger than the reflector on the light pole. It continued to walk down the driveway, and I was trying to follow it with my light, and I lost sight of it. I began to walk out between my house and my son's house, trying to locate it again. I finally saw it again for a minute, and then I lost it behind my son's garage. I was halfway between the 2 houses, and I called to my husband to bring me a gun. He was headed back into the house. 30 years ago, I planted a cedar tree between our houses. That tree is big now, and I walked all the way over there and I stood beside it. Still searching with my spotlight, I finally reacquired the beast standing against the south side of the garage. I was in total shock and I froze in place. There was no doubt in my mind that this creature could hear my heart beating in my chest. There's no way to explain how big this thing was. It was so tall that it almost touched the 10-foot-high soffit on the garage. Whatever had been hanging from its mouth earlier was still there. I think that it had caught a house cat. An odd hump on its back gave it an even more menacing appearance. The wide forehead sat over a huge muzzle where 3-inch canines clamped down on its kill. It had massive jaws that were built for crushing bones. The ears were like a German shepherd, but they were larger. Dark, long claws extended from its massive hands. Its legs were not like a dog's, though. They looked more human-like and muscular. The light-colored hair that covered its body blended with the color of the environment here. It was sandy or tan-colored. This was not a brief encounter. It lasted 8 to 10 minutes. My husband never brought me the gun, and all I could do was pray. I was too far from the house to run for it, and I knew if I ran, the thing would chase me and more than likely catch me. I never took my eyes off this thing. I never moved a muscle. And this monster and I stared at each other, and we never moved. After an eternity, it began to move away from me. It slowly eased around the corner of the building, and then it was gone. My light was shining all over the area. I needed to get eyes on this thing because I didn't know what it was doing. It could have been circling me to come at me from another angle. Minutes passed, and I stood by that cedar tree holding on to my light. Finally, I had to move. I slowly began to walk backwards, and I made it all the way to the house. I ripped into my husband for not bringing me a rifle. I was furious. He denied seeing the thing. My guess is that he was too afraid to come back out, and he knew he couldn't talk me into coming inside. Fear will do strange things to people. I will always remember those eyes, those huge amber eyes. They pierced my soul, and I believe when I rebuked it in the name of the Lord that it left. This creature has not made another appearance on my place, and I hope it never does. Who knows what this thing was? Maybe it was a dog man. But I know this was the most terrifying encounter that I'd had in all those years on my place. The encounters that I've shared with you are only encounters with cryptids. Paranormal experiences are common here, and there have been many, but those are other stories for another time. I'm going to interject here. To understand what she's talking about, you have to go back and listen to the Skinwalker, Colorado video. It's an hour and 15 minutes of her just encounter after encounter after encounter that she has on this property since she was a little girl. I'll link it. I'll put it on the end screen. How about that? But she goes on to write, our property has an ancient history. There were people here long before Europeans set foot on this continent. More recently, the Navajo and the Ute people lived here, and we've uncovered artifacts to back that up. Ancient nomadic people always lived near water, and this river has been here for a long time. With the long history of this area comes many unexplainable, paranormal, and cryptid events, much like I've described in this writing. My experiences have not been pleasant, and some have scared me to death. You would think that I would have left this place, but I refuse to run from this nonsense. This is my land, and nothing is going to run me off. I have many questions that I would like to have answers to, but I will trust in the Lord, and I'll look forward to the day that I stand before Him, when all will be revealed and I will have my answers. These encounters are real, and the encounters are ongoing even now. I'm sharing these stories to leave a record of all that has happened here, and I want people to know there are many types of cryptids. Bigfoot is only one of them. I feel the weight of responsibility to inform people about these things that lurk in the dark places and in the forests. In no way am I telling you to be afraid of the outdoors. You should enjoy the wild places. But what I am saying is to be aware of your environment. Slow down, listen, and watch. You actually do have a sixth sense, and I want you to use it while you enjoy the beauty of the forests, the rivers, the wetlands, and the mountains. Listen to your instincts. God bless you all.